The millionaire wakes up next to his intern and realizes that maybe they've gone too far. Before we explore all the details of this incredible story, tell us where you're following us from and the time. Subscribe to the channel so you don't miss a thing, and let's embark on this journey together. She shouldn't have stayed, but she did. The Chicago sunrise painted Dylan Crawford's penthouse in shades of gold and regret. At 36, he'd built an empire on calculated decisions and emotional distance. He controlled billion-dollar investments with the precision of a surgeon, never allowing feelings to cloud his judgment. Until now. Dylan sat on the edge of his king-size bed, running his hands through his dark hair as reality crashed over him like a cold wave. The silk sheets beside him still held the warmth of another body, and the faint scent of jasmine perfume lingered in the air, a reminder of the night that had shattered every rule he'd ever made. What the hell happened? Behind him, Raina Mitchell stirred, her breathing shifting from the deep rhythm of sleep to something lighter. Dylan's shoulders tensed. In 12 hours, everything had changed, and he wasn't sure if he was ready for her to wake up. But she did. Oh, God. Raina's voice was barely a whisper, thick with sleep and shock. Dylan didn't turn around. He couldn't. Not yet. Good morning, Raina. The bed shifted as she sat up, and he could feel her eyes on his back. 24 years old, brilliant, and the most beautiful woman who'd ever challenged him, both professionally and personally. Her deep brown skin had a natural glow that no amount of makeup could replicate, and her natural curls framed a face that belonged in art galleries, not corporate boardrooms. Mr. Crawford, she started, her voice steadier now but tinged with uncertainty. Don't. He finally turned to face her, his steel-grey eyes meeting her warm amber ones. Don't call me that. Not now. Raina pulled the sheet higher, covering herself, but her posture remained confident. That was what had drawn him to her from day one. She never cowered. Not from him, not from anyone. She was a force of nature wrapped in designer suits and fierce determination. We need to talk, she said, her chin lifting slightly. Dylan stood, reaching for his white dress shirt from the floor. His 6'2" frame moved with the controlled grace of someone who'd spent years perfecting every gesture. I know. The silence stretched between them as he buttoned his shirt, each second heavy with unspoken questions. The penthouse's floor-to-ceiling windows offered a breathtaking view of the city, but neither of them was looking at the skyline. Do you remember, Raina began. Everything, Dylan interrupted, his voice rougher than intended. The company party, the wine, the way you laughed when I told you about my first investment disaster. A ghost of a smile crossed her lips. You said you'd never told anyone that story. I hadn't. Their eyes met again and the air between them crackled with the same electricity that had ignited the night before. Dylan remembered the way she'd looked in that midnight blue dress, how her confidence had commanded the room's attention. He remembered the moment she'd challenged his investment strategy in front of his board members and been absolutely right. Most of all, he remembered the way she'd looked at him when the music started, like she could see past the walls he'd spent decades building. This can't happen again, Dylan said, though his voice lacked conviction. Raina stood, wrapping the sheet around herself like armor. I know. You work for me. I'm aware. You're 24, and you're 36. I can do math, Dylan. The way she said his name sent a jolt through him. No deference, no hesitation, just his name, spoken like she had every right to it. People will talk, he continued, as if listing obstacles could make the attraction disappear. Let them. Raina moved closer, and Dylan caught that jasmine scent again. I didn't get into financial analysis because I was afraid of risk assessment. Despite everything, Dylan almost smiled. Even now she was treating their situation like a business proposition. It should have annoyed him. Instead, it only made him want her more. Raina, he started, but she held up a hand. I know what you're going to say. That this was a mistake, that we should pretend it never happened, and go back to being professional. She stepped closer, close enough that he could see the golden flecks in her eyes. But we both know that's impossible now. Dylan's jaw tightened. She was right, and they both knew it. The careful distance they'd maintained for 3 months had crumbled in a single night of shared laughter, meaningful glances, and wine-loosened inhibitions. I should go, Raina said softly. Get dressed, go home, shower off last night, and show up at the office Monday morning like nothing happened. Yes, Dylan agreed, though the word felt like swallowing glass. That would be best. But neither of them moved. They stood there 3 feet apart, drowning in the weight of everything they couldn't say. The morning light caught the curve of Rayna's collarbone where the sheet had slipped slightly, and Dylan had to force himself to look away. "I'll call a car for you," he said, reaching for his phone. "Already did." Rayna's smile was small, but genuine. "While you were having your internal crisis, I was being practical." That made him look at her again. "You're not upset about last night?" "No." Her honesty was brutal and beautiful. "About what it means for Monday morning, we'll figure it out." A soft chime from her phone broke the spell. "That's my ride," she said. Dylan watched as she gathered her dress from the floor, her movements graceful despite the awkwardness of the situation. She disappeared into his bathroom, emerging 5 minutes later fully dressed, her curls tamed into a professional bun. "Rayna!" Dylan called as she reached for the door handle. She turned back, and for a moment, he almost said everything. How she'd turned his carefully ordered world upside down. How he hadn't been able to think about anything but her smile for weeks. How last night felt like the first time he'd truly been alive. Instead, he said, "See you Monday." Her smile was enigmatic. "See you Monday, Mr. Crawford." The door clicked shut behind her, leaving Dylan alone with the lingering scent of jasmine and the terrible certainty that nothing would ever be the same. He walked to the window, watching the street 40 floors below, until he saw Rayna emerge from the building and slide into a waiting car. Even from this distance, she moved with that same confident stride that had caught his attention during her first presentation. Dylan pressed his palm against the cool glass and closed his eyes. Monday was going to be hell. Some rules were meant to be broken. Monday morning came too fast and not fast enough. Dylan Crawford stood before his bathroom mirror at 5:30 a.m., adjusting his charcoal grey tie for the third time. In 12 years of running Crawford Industries, he'd never felt nervous about going to his own office. But then again, he'd never spent a weekend replaying every moment of a night that should never have happened. The memory hit him again. Rayna's enigmatic smile as she'd left his penthouse, the way she'd called him Mr. Crawford with that hint of challenge in her voice. She'd walked out like a queen who'd just conquered a kingdom, leaving him standing there wondering who had seduced whom. Focus, Crawford. It's just another Monday. But as his driver navigated through Chicago's morning traffic, Dylan knew nothing about this day would be ordinary. 43 floors above the bustling streets, Dylan's corner office felt different. The mahogany desk, the leather chairs, the wall of windows overlooking the city. Everything was exactly where it should be. Everything except his ability to concentrate. He'd been reviewing quarterly reports since 7 a.m., but the numbers blurred together every time he imagined Rayna walking through his door. Would she maintain that confident composure? Would she pretend nothing had changed? The knock came at exactly 8:15 a.m. "Mr. Crawford, your Monday briefing is ready," his assistant Margaret announced through the intercom. "Send them in." Dylan straightened his shoulders and positioned himself behind his desk, the same power pose he'd perfected over years of high-stakes meetings. But when the door opened and his senior team filed in, his carefully constructed composure cracked. Rayna entered last, wearing a fitted burgundy blazer that complemented her warm brown skin perfectly. Her natural curls were pulled back in a sleek, low bun, and when her amber eyes met his across the conference table, she smiled, the same enigmatic expression she'd worn leaving his penthouse. "Game on." "Good morning, everyone," Dylan began, his voice steady despite the way his pulse had accelerated. "Let's start with the Morrison acquisition update." As James launched into his presentation about merger timelines, Dylan found himself studying Rayna. She sat with perfect posture, occasionally taking notes, but there was something different about her today. A new confidence, like she was holding a secret that amused her. When their eyes met during James's discussion of overseas assets, she didn't look away. Instead, she held his gaze for a beat longer than professional, the corner of her mouth quirking up almost imperceptibly. "She's enjoying this." "What about liability assessments on their European holdings?" Dylan asked, his voice rougher than intended. "Actually," Rayna spoke up smoothly, "I spent yesterday reviewing their Frankfurt and London portfolios." "Yesterday? Sunday? While I was going insane thinking about you." She stood and moved to the digital display with fluid grace, her heels clicking confidently against the marble floor. As she pulled up charts and financial projections, Dylan noticed she'd chosen to stand where the morning light would catch the curve of her neck, the same neck he'd traced with his lips just 36 hours ago. "Their European numbers look solid on the surface," Rayna continued, "but there's creative accounting masking some concerning patterns in their subsidiary relationships." For the next 10 minutes, She systematically dismantled the Morrison deal with surgical precision, her analysis flawless and her presentation commanding. But Dylan barely heard the financial details. He was transfixed by the way she owned the room, the confident tilt of her chin, the subtle power in her voice. This wasn't the uncertain young woman from Saturday night. This was Raina in her element, brilliant, formidable, and completely in control. "Excellent work," Patricia said when Raina finished. "I hadn't caught those subsidiary connections. Thank you." Raina's smile was gracious but unsurprised. She knew her worth, and she knew Dylan was watching her prove it. "We'll need a comprehensive report by Wednesday," Dylan said, fighting to keep his tone neutral. "Can you handle that timeline?" Raina turned to face him directly, her eyes sparkling with challenge. "I work very well under pressure, Mr. Crawford, as I'm sure you've noticed." The emphasis on his formal title was deliberate, the same subtle tease from Sunday morning. Dylan felt heat rise in his chest. She's playing with fire. As the meeting concluded and people filed out, Dylan found himself alone with Raina for the first time since she'd left his penthouse. She was gathering her papers with deliberate slowness, clearly in no hurry to leave. "Raina," Dylan started, then paused. "What was the professional way to say I can't stop thinking about the way you felt in my arms?" She looked up, eyebrows raised expectantly. "Yes, about this weekend. What about it?" Her tone was perfectly innocent, but her eyes were dancing with mischief. Dylan stepped around his desk, closing some of the distance between them. "We should probably discuss what happened." "Should we?" Raina set down her portfolio and turned to face him fully. "I thought we already established that it was unprofessional." The way she said the word made it sound like anything but a criticism. "It was," Dylan agreed, though his voice lacked conviction. Raina tilted her head, studying him. "You seem tense, Mr. Crawford. Didn't you sleep well yesterday?" She knows exactly what she's doing. "I slept fine," Dylan lied. "Good." Raina picked up her portfolio and moved toward the door, pausing just before reaching it. "Because I'd hate to think one little evening disrupted your entire routine." "One little evening." "Raina," Dylan called as she reached for the handle. She turned back and suddenly the playful mask slipped just enough for him to see something raw underneath. "Yes?" "Your analysis was exceptional, as always." Her smile was genuine now. No games or challenges. "Thank you. I know my value, Dylan." The use of his first name sent electricity through the space between them. Then she was gone, leaving him with the faint scent of jasmine and the certainty that everything had changed. Dylan sank into his chair, running his hands through his hair. Raina Mitchell wasn't running from what had happened between them. She was weaponizing it, and God help him, he found that absolutely intoxicating. 3 floors down, Raina allowed herself a small smile of satisfaction as she settled at her desk. The morning had gone exactly as she'd planned. She'd spent Sunday not hiding from what happened with Dylan, but strategizing. She refused to be the ashamed intern running from her choices. If they were going to navigate this new dynamic, it would be on her terms. Her phone buzzed with a text from her best friend Maya. "Spill everything. How was facing Mr. Billionaire this morning?" Raina typed back, "Perfectly professional and perfectly under control," which was true. She was in control of her career, her choices, and the delicious tension building between her and Dylan Crawford. Her computer screen showed the usual Monday chaos: emails, meeting requests, analysis deadlines. Perfect. Work had always been her domain of power, and today she felt more confident than ever. She was deep in Morrison research when her desk phone rang. "Raina Mitchell." "It's Dylan." His voice was lower than usual, more intimate despite the professional setting. "Can you come up to my office? I need to discuss the Morrison timeline privately." Raina leaned back in her chair, smiling. "Of course, I'll be right up." But as she gathered her papers, she wondered if Dylan realized he was walking into her trap. Dylan had been pacing for exactly 4 minutes when the knock came. "Come in." Raina entered and closed the door with a soft click, a sound that seemed to echo in Dylan's chest. She was holding a tablet and a leather portfolio, the picture of professional competence. "You wanted to discuss Morrison?" she asked, moving to stand in front of his desk. "Yes," Dylan said, though now that she was here, Morrison was the last thing on his mind. "The timeline is aggressive, and I want to make sure you have the support you need. I appreciate the concern, but I can handle it." Raina set her materials on his desk and looked up at him. "Unless you're questioning my capabilities," there was a challenge in her voice, the same confidence that had captivated him since her first presentation 3 months ago. "Never," Dylan said firmly. Your capabilities were never in question. Good. Raina moved closer, close enough that he could catch that hint of jasmine in her perfume. Because I'd hate for Saturday night to change your professional opinion of me. The directness of her statement caught Dylan off guard. It hasn't. Hasn't it? Raina tilted her head. Because you seem different today. More careful with me. Dylan studied her face, looking for signs of uncertainty or regret. Instead, he found calm confidence and something that looked dangerously like amusement. Maybe I'm being careful for good reason, he said quietly. What reason is that? They were standing close enough now that Dylan could see the golden flecks in her eyes, could feel the warmth radiating from her skin. The afternoon sun streaming through his windows painted everything in warm light, making the moment feel suspended in time. Because, Dylan said, his voice roughening, every time I look at you, all I can think about is how right it felt to have you in my arms. Raina's breath caught, but she didn't step back. And that scares you? Terrifies me, Dylan admitted. For a moment, they stood in perfect stillness, the weight of honesty hanging between them. Then Raina smiled, not the playful expression from earlier, but something softer and more dangerous. Good, she said quietly. It should terrify you, because I'm not going anywhere, Dylan Crawford. She picked up her materials and headed for the door, pausing with her hand on the handle. And next time you want to discuss timelines, she said without turning around, maybe choose a meeting room with less history. Then she was gone, leaving Dylan standing in the golden afternoon light, wondering when exactly Raina Mitchell had taken control of his entire world. And somewhere 3 floors below, Raina was already planning her next move. The best games were played with the highest stakes. Tuesday evening painted Dylan's office in shades of amber and shadow. The rest of Crawford Industries had emptied hours ago, leaving only security guards and the hum of servers running endless calculations. But Dylan remained at his desk, surrounded by financial reports he couldn't focus on and thoughts of a woman who'd turned his world upside down. The Morrison analysis sat before him. Raina's work, delivered exactly when promised. Her insights were brilliant, her recommendations flawless. She'd even included alternative investment strategies he hadn't considered, professional perfection, wrapped in personal torture. Every page reminded him of her confident smile, the way she'd stood in his office that afternoon and told him she wasn't going anywhere. The memory sent heat through his chest and made concentration impossible. A soft knock interrupted his brooding. "Come in," Dylan called, expecting security or the night cleaning crew. Instead, Raina appeared in his doorway, still wearing her burgundy blazer, but with her hair now loose around her shoulders in soft curls. She carried 2 cups of coffee and moved with that same fluid confidence that had captivated him for months. "Working late?" she asked, stepping into his office without invitation. Dylan's pulse quickened. "I could ask you the same thing. Research." Raina set 1 coffee cup on his desk and settled into the leather chair across from him. "I saw your light on from the parking garage. Thought you might need caffeine." The gesture was thoughtful and intimate, crossing professional boundaries with deliberate ease. Dylan studied her face, looking for clues to her intentions. "Thank you," he said carefully, "though I should point out that bringing your boss coffee at 9 p.m. might send the wrong message." Raina's smile was enigmatic. "What message would that be? That you're driving me insane and you know it? That you're working too hard," Dylan said instead. Raina crossed her legs and leaned back, completely at ease in his space. "Or maybe it sends the message that I know what I want." The words hung between them, loaded with possibility. Dylan took a sip of coffee to steady himself. It was perfect, exactly how he liked it. Of course, she'd noticed his preferences. "Raina," Dylan started, then stopped. Every conversation with her felt like navigating a minefield of attraction and professionalism. "I read the Morrison analysis," he said instead. "Your alternative strategies are impressive. Thank you. I aim to exceed expectations." She tilted her head, studying him. "You look tired, Dylan. When's the last time you went home before midnight?" The use of his first name in the empty office felt intimate, dangerous. "I sleep when deals are closed. That's not sustainable. Even brilliant CEOs need rest." "Is that your professional opinion, Dr. Mitchell?" Raina laughed, a warm sound that filled the space between them. "That's my personal observation. I notice things about people I care about." People I care about. The phrase lodged in Dylan's chest like a physical weight. "Do you?" Dylan asked quietly. "Care about me?" The question escaped before he could stop it. raw and honest in a way that would have mortified him 48 hours ago. But something about Raina's presence made pretense impossible. She was quiet for a long moment, her amber eyes studying his face with an intensity that made him feel exposed. "More than I should," she admitted finally. "More than is smart for either of us." The honesty between them crackled like electricity. Dylan set down his coffee and leaned forward, closing some of the distance between them. "Raina, don't." She held up a hand, but her voice was gentle. "Don't say something you'll regret tomorrow morning." "What if I won't regret it?" "You will. Because you're Dylan Crawford. Controlled, calculating, always 3 steps ahead. You don't make impulsive decisions about anything, especially not about the women in your life." Dylan stood abruptly, moving to the window that overlooked the glittering Chicago skyline. "Maybe that's the problem." "What do you mean?" He could hear her moving behind him, the soft click of her heels against marble. When he turned, she was standing closer, close enough that he could catch that hint of jasmine that had haunted him for days. "I've spent 12 years building this company on logic and careful planning," Dylan said. "Every decision calculated, every risk assessed. It's made me successful, but it's also made me lonely," Raina finished softly. The word hit too close to home. Dylan's jaw tightened, but he didn't deny it. "Saturday night," he continued, "for the first time in years I stopped calculating, stopped thinking about consequences and spreadsheets and board meetings. I just felt." Raina moved closer still, until they were standing in the golden glow of his desk lamp, the rest of the city sparkling beyond the windows. "And how did that feel?" she asked. "Terrifying," Dylan admitted, "and perfect." They stood in silence for a moment, the weight of confession hanging between them. Then Raina reached out, her fingertips brushing against his hand where it rested on the windowsill. The touch was electric, sending heat up Dylan's arm and straight to his chest. He looked down at their almost joined hands, then back to her face. "Raina, I need to tell you something," Dylan said, his voice rough. "I haven't been able to think about anything else since Saturday night. Not deals, not meetings, not the quarterly projections that could make or break this company. Just you." "Dylan," she whispered, "I know it's complicated. I know there are rules and expectations and a dozen reasons why this is impossible, but I can't pretend anymore that what happened between us was just a mistake." Raina's eyes searched his face, and Dylan saw his own uncertainty reflected there. For all her confidence and strategic thinking, she was navigating uncharted territory too. "What are you saying?" she asked. Dylan stepped closer until they were breathing the same air. "I'm saying that I want to explore whatever this is between us, carefully, privately, but honestly. And if it ruins everything, your company, my career, both our reputations, then at least we'll know we tried instead of spending the rest of our lives wondering what if." Raina was quiet for a long moment, her hand still touching his. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. "You're asking me to risk everything I've worked for. I'm asking you to take a chance on something that could be extraordinary." The words hung in the air between them, a challenge and a promise wrapped in golden light and possibility. Raina stepped back, her hand slipping away from his, and Dylan's heart sank. But instead of moving toward the door, she walked to his desk and set down her coffee cup with deliberate precision. When she turned back to face him, her smile was pure, feminine power. "I have conditions," she said. Dylan's pulse quickened. "I'm listening. First, this stays completely private until we figure out what it is. No public displays, no office gossip, no romantic gestures that Margaret might notice." "Agreed." "Second, my work performance remains separate from whatever happens between us personally. I won't accept special treatment, and I won't tolerate any suggestion that my success is connected to our relationship. I wouldn't insult you that way." "Good." Raina moved closer again, her confidence radiating like heat. "Third, if this doesn't work out, we handle it like adults. No drama, no retaliation, no making the workplace uncomfortable for either of us." Dylan nodded, mesmerized by the way she was taking control of the situation. "Anything else?" Raina stepped close enough that her hand could rest against his chest, directly over his racing heart. "Yes," she said, looking up at him with eyes full of mischief and promise. "Next time you want to confess your feelings, do it somewhere more romantic than your office. A woman has standards, after all." Dylan laughed despite the tension, covering her hand with his own. "Duly noted. Any suggestions?" "I'm sure a brilliant CEO can figure something out." Raina rose up on her toes, pressing a soft kiss to his cheek that lasted just long enough to make his knees weak. "Good night, Dylan." She collected her things and headed for the door, pausing just before leaving. "Oh, and Dylan?" she called without turning around. "Yes? Next time ask me properly. A woman like me deserves to be courted." Then she was gone, leaving Dylan standing in his office with the lingering scent of jasmine and the absolute certainty that Raina Mitchell was going to be the most beautiful challenge of his life. And 3 floors below, Raina leaned against her car in the empty parking garage, smiling at the thought of Dylan Crawford learning how to chase something he couldn't simply acquire. Some lessons were best learned through trial by fire. Wednesday arrived with Dylan Crawford doing something he hadn't done in 15 years, second-guessing himself. He stood in his penthouse kitchen at 6 a.m., staring at his phone like it might explode. The message he'd typed and deleted 17 times still glowed on the screen. "Would you have dinner with me Friday? Somewhere that meets your standards." Dylan. Too formal, too presumptuous, not romantic enough. Dylan deleted it again, running his hand through his hair. In boardrooms, he commanded respect with effortless authority. He'd negotiated billion-dollar deals without breaking a sweat, but asking Raina Mitchell on a proper date felt more terrifying than any hostile takeover. She said to ask her properly. What does that even mean? His phone buzzed with an incoming text, and Dylan's heart jumped until he saw it was from his assistant Margaret. "Your 8 a.m. moved to 9 a.m. James needs more time to prep the Henderson presentation." Dylan typed back a quick confirmation, then stared at the blank message screen again. Somewhere in this city, Raina was probably getting ready for work, confident and radiant, completely unaware that she'd turned Chicago's most decisive CEO into an overthinking mess. "Just ask her, Crawford. What's the worst that could happen?" His finger hovered over the send button for another 30 seconds before he finally pressed it. 3 miles away, Raina Mitchell stood in her Lincoln Park brownstone apartment, selecting jewelry from the vintage wooden box her grandmother had given her. She'd chosen a deep emerald blouse that complemented her warm skin tone and made her eyes sparkle. Not that she was dressing for anyone in particular. Liar. Her phone chimed from the dresser, and Raina's pulse quickened when she saw Dylan's name on the screen. "Would you have dinner with me Friday? Somewhere that meets your standards. Dylan." Raina read the message twice, a smile tugging at her lips. The formal signature, the careful wording. He was clearly nervous, which was both adorable and intoxicating. Dylan Crawford, master of the financial universe, reduced to uncertainty by her challenge to court her properly. Good. Let him work for it. Instead of responding immediately, Raina finished getting ready, chose her favorite gold hoop earrings, and made herself a proper cup of coffee. Let him wonder for a few minutes. Anticipation was half the pleasure. 20 minutes later, she finally typed back, "Friday works, but I have very high standards, Mr. Crawford. Don't disappoint me. R." She hit send and immediately felt her phone buzz with his response. "Challenge accepted. I'll pick you up at 7. Wear something beautiful." D. Raina laughed out loud. Wear something beautiful, as if she'd wear anything else. Dylan spent Wednesday morning in back-to-back meetings, but his mind kept drifting to Friday night. Where could he take her that would impress someone as sophisticated as Raina? She wasn't like the other women he'd dated, socialites who were thrilled by expensive restaurants and designer gifts. Raina valued intelligence, authenticity, effort. During lunch, he found himself doing something unprecedented, researching romantic restaurants like a teenager planning his first date. A linear, too pretentious. The signature room, too touristy. RPM steak, too obvious. "Sir?" His assistant Margaret appeared in his doorway with a concerned expression. "Your 2 p.m. is here, but you seemed distracted. Are you feeling all right?" Dylan looked up from his computer, suddenly aware that he'd been staring at restaurant reviews for 20 minutes. "I'm fine, Margaret, send them in." But as the afternoon progressed, Dylan realized he was anything but fine. For the first time in his professional life, he was struggling to concentrate on business because he was thinking about a woman. And not just any woman, Raina. By Thursday evening, Dylan had made reservations at 4 different restaurants, cancelled 3 of them, and was second-guessing the 4th. He stood in his home office looking out at the city lights when inspiration struck. She said to ask her properly. Maybe proper doesn't mean expensive. Maybe it means personal. Dylan picked up his phone and dialed a number he hadn't called in years. "Mom, it's Dylan. I need your help with something." Friday arrived with unseasonable warmth for October in Chicago. Raina had spent an embarrassing amount of time choosing her outfit. A midnight blue wrap dress that hugged her curves perfectly and emphasized her décolletage without being obvious about it. Her natural curls were styled in loose waves that cascaded over one shoulder. and she'd chosen makeup that enhanced her features while appearing effortless. If Dylan Crawford wants to court me properly, he's going to remember why. At exactly 7 p.m., her doorbell rang. Raina took one last look in the mirror, grabbed her leather jacket, and opened the door. Dylan stood on her front steps, looking absolutely devastating in a charcoal grey suit and dark blue tie that made his steel grey eyes appear almost silver. But what caught her attention wasn't his appearance. It was the single white orchid in his hand and the slightly nervous expression on his face. "Hi," he said, offering her the flower. "You look stunning," doesn't begin to cover it. Raina accepted the orchid, noting its expensive elegance and the way Dylan had clearly put thought into choosing something unique instead of typical roses. "Thank you," she said, inhaling the flower's subtle fragrance. "And you look quite handsome yourself. Though I have to ask, are you nervous, Mr. Crawford?" Dylan's smile was rueful, terrified actually. "It's been a while since I've had to impress someone who mattered." The honesty in his voice sent warmth through Raina's chest. This wasn't the controlled CEO from the office. This was Dylan without armor, vulnerable and real. "Well," she said, stepping out and locking her door, "I suppose we'll see what you've learned about proper courtship." "I have a good teacher," Dylan replied, offering her his arm. As they walked to his car, a sleek black Aston Martin that somehow managed to be impressive without being ostentatious, Raina noticed Dylan's attention to small details, how he opened doors without being asked, how he waited for her to settle before starting the engine, how he'd chosen music that was sophisticated but not overwhelming. "So," Raina said as they pulled into traffic, "where are we going?" "Somewhere expensive and obvious, I hope, so I can lecture you about effort versus expense." Dylan glanced at her, his smile mysterious. "Actually, we're going somewhere I've never taken anyone before." "Really, and where might that be?" "You'll see." 20 minutes later, Dylan pulled into the parking lot of what appeared to be a small community center in Bronzeville, one of Chicago's historic neighborhoods. Raina looked around, confused but intrigued. "Dylan, what?" "Trust me," he said, coming around to open her door. "I promise this meets your standards." He led her through a side entrance and down a hallway lined with photos of jazz legends, Muddy Waters, Buddy Guy, Etta James. The sound of live piano drifted from somewhere deeper in the building. "Dylan Crawford," Raina said slowly, "did you bring me to a jazz club?" "Not just any jazz club," Dylan replied, his voice warm with pride at her obvious pleasure. "This place has been showcasing local musicians for 60 years. My grandmother used to bring me here when I was a kid. It's where I learned to appreciate real music instead of whatever was popular." They emerged into an intimate room with maybe 30 tables, most filled with couples and small groups, listening to a piano trio that was making magic happen on a small stage. The lighting was warm and golden, the atmosphere sophisticated but unpretentious. "Dylan," Raina breathed, genuinely moved. "This is perfect." His smile was worth every moment of anxiety he'd endured planning this. "I thought about expensive restaurants and fancy hotels, but then I remembered what you said about standards. This isn't about money, it's about sharing something meaningful." A hostess led them to a small table near the window, close enough to appreciate the music, but far enough from other diners to have privacy. Dylan ordered wine, a bottle of Burgundy he'd researched specifically for Raina's taste preferences, and for the first time in days, he felt like himself again. "Tell me about your grandmother," Raina said once they were settled. "Eleanor Crawford was a force of nature," Dylan said, his voice softening with memory. "She grew up in the South during segregation, moved north during the Great Migration. She understood music as a bridge between cultures, between people who might otherwise never connect. She sounds incredible." She was. "She died when I was 16, but she taught me that real sophistication isn't about what you can afford, it's about what you can appreciate." Raina leaned forward slightly, her eyes sparkling with genuine interest. "Is that why you chose this place? To honor her memory?" "Partly," Dylan admitted, "but mostly because I wanted to show you something real, something that matters to me." The piano trio finished their set, and in the brief silence that followed, Dylan could hear his own heartbeat. Raina was looking at him with an expression he couldn't quite read, surprise, pleasure, and something deeper that made his chest tight. "Dylan Crawford," she said finally, her voice soft with wonder, "you continue to surprise me. Is that a good thing?" "It's a very good thing." Raina lifted her wine glass, her smile radiant, "to proper courtship and meaningful surprises." Dylan clinked his glass against hers, feeling like he'd passed some crucial test. And somewhere between the jazz standards and Raina's laughter, He began to understand that courting this extraordinary woman wasn't about impressing her, it was about revealing himself. The real challenge, Dylan realized, wasn't winning Raina's attention. It was proving he deserved to keep it. Some nights were meant to change everything. The second set began with a haunting rendition of At Last, and Dylan watched Raina close her eyes, letting the music wash over her. In the golden glow of the club's intimate lighting, she looked ethereal, a vision of elegance and warmth that made his chest ache with something deeper than desire. "You love jazz," he observed softly, not wanting to break the spell, but unable to resist speaking. "My father was a musician," Raina said without opening her eyes. "Piano and saxophone. He used to say that jazz was the only music that told the truth about love. Beautiful, complicated, improvised." Dylan leaned forward slightly. "Used to? He died when I was 18. Raina's eyes opened, meeting his across the small table. "Heart attack. Sudden, unexpected. One day he was teaching me Coltrane progressions, the next—" "I'm sorry," Dylan said, and meant it. The vulnerability in her voice made him want to reach across the table and take her hand. "Thank you." Raina's smile was soft, but tinged with old sadness. "It's why I went into finance instead of music. Practical choice, stable career. My mother needed security after losing him. But you still love it, music." "I do, it reminds me of him." Raina lifted her wine glass, studying Dylan over the rim. "What about you? What reminds you of your grandmother?" Dylan was quiet for a moment, surprised by how much he wanted to tell her. "Crossword puzzles. She did the Sunday Times crossword every week, always in pen. Said it showed commitment to your choices." "In pen," Raina repeated, amused. "That's very confident." "She was very confident. About everything except my grandfather's cooking." Dylan's smile was warm with memory. She'd let him make breakfast on Sundays, then quietly feed it to their neighbor's dog when he wasn't looking. Raina laughed, the sound bright and genuine. "How long were they married?" 47 years. She used to say that love wasn't about finding someone perfect. It was about finding someone whose imperfections you could live with forever. Smart woman. The smartest. Dylan paused, realizing he'd never shared these stories with anyone before. "What about your parents? How did they meet?" "At a dive bar on the south side. Mum was there with friends. Dad was playing a gig for $30 and free drinks." Raina's eyes sparkled with the memory. She said he played round midnight like he was trying to seduce every woman in the room, but when he looked at her, she knew the song was just for her. Love at first sight? More like Love at First Song. Raina tilted her head, studying Dylan's face. "Do you believe in that? Instant connection?" The question hung between them, loaded with implication. Dylan felt his pulse quicken as he realized they were no longer talking about other people. "I used to think it was a myth," he said carefully. "Chemical attraction disguised as romance." "Used to." Dylan held her gaze, feeling like he was standing at the edge of a cliff. 3 months ago, a brilliant woman walked into my conference room and challenged my investment strategy in front of my entire board. She was fearless, articulate, and completely right. And I knew, in that moment, that she was going to change my life. Raina's breath caught almost imperceptibly. "That was a presentation about quarterly projections, Dylan. Hardly romantic, wasn't it?" Dylan leaned forward, his voice dropping to something barely above a whisper. "You stood there in that navy blue dress, commanding the room like you owned it, and I forgot every rule I'd ever made about mixing business with pleasure. You remember what I was wearing? I remember everything about that day, how you twisted your pen when you were thinking, how you raised one eyebrow when James tried to interrupt you, how you looked at me when I said your analysis was exceptional, like you were surprised that I recognized your intelligence instead of just your beauty." Raina set down her wineglass with trembling fingers. "Dylan, I know it's complicated," he continued. "I know there are a dozen reasons why this is dangerous. But sitting here with you, sharing stories about people we loved, listening to music that matters, this doesn't feel complicated at all." The jazz trio transitioned into "The Way You Look Tonight," and Dylan stood, extending his hand toward Raina. "Dance with me," he said. "Here?" Raina glanced around the intimate club. A few other couples had moved to the small space in front of the stage, swaying to the romantic melody. "Here," Dylan confirmed, "unless it doesn't meet your standards." Raina's smile was radiant as she placed her hand in his. "I suppose I can make an exception." Dylan led her to the makeshift dance floor, pulling her into his arms with a gentleness that made her heart flutter. They moved together slowly, finding their rhythm in the space between the music and their own thundering pulses. "You're full of surprises," Raina murmured, her hand resting on his chest where she could feel his heartbeat. Good surprises? The best kind. She looked up at him, noting the way the golden light caught the silver flecks in his eyes. Though I have to ask, was this whole evening planned to seduce me? Dylan's hand tightened slightly on her waist. If I say yes, will you think less of me? If you say no, I'll think you're lying. Dylan laughed, spinning her gently before pulling her back against him. Then yes, Raina Mitchell, every detail of this evening was carefully orchestrated to show you that you deserve to be courted by a man who recognizes what a rare gift you are. And if I told you it was working, then I'd ask if you wanted to take a walk after this song ends. There's a park nearby with a view of the skyline. Very romantic, completely public, absolutely respectable. Raina rose up on her toes, bringing her lips close to his ear. Ask me properly, Mr. Crawford. Dylan's breath caught at the feel of her voice against his skin. Raina Mitchell, would you do me the honor of walking through Burnham Park with me? I promise to be a complete gentleman unless you give me reason to be otherwise. That depends, Raina said, pulling back to meet his eyes. What constitutes reason to be otherwise? I suppose we'll have to find out. The song ended, but neither of them moved apart immediately. They stood in the golden glow of the club, surrounded by the gentle murmur of conversation and the soft notes of the piano, existing in a bubble of possibility. Raina, Dylan said quietly, his voice rough with emotion he wasn't trying to hide anymore. Yes, thank you for giving me a chance to do this right. Thank you for being worth the chance. 20 minutes later, they walked through Burnham Park under a canopy of stars, Chicago's skyline glittering across Lake Michigan like scattered diamonds. The October air was crisp but not cold, perfect for the leather jacket Raina had brought and the way Dylan's suit jacket draped over her shoulders when the breeze picked up. Tell me something I don't know about you, Raina said as they paused at a bench overlooking the water. Something you don't know? Dylan considered the question seriously. I wanted to be a teacher when I was young. Literature, specifically. Really? What changed your mind? My father died when I was 22, right before my senior year at Northwestern. Mom needed help with the family finances, and teaching wouldn't pay enough. Dylan's voice was matter-of-fact, but Raina heard the old disappointment underneath. So I switched to business, started Crawford Industries with my inheritance money, and here we are. Do you ever regret it? Not anymore, Dylan said, turning to look at her. Success has its compensations, such as being able to afford dinner at exclusive jazz clubs with extraordinary women. Raina laughed, bumping his shoulder with hers. Smooth, Mr. Crawford, very smooth. I'm learning from a master of charm. They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, watching the city lights reflect on the dark water. Then Raina spoke, her voice thoughtful. You know what I realized tonight? What's that? You're not at all what I expected when I first met you. Dylan raised an eyebrow. What did you expect? Typical CEO. Arrogant, entitled, the kind of man who thinks money can buy anything, including affection. Raina turned to face him on the bench. But you're not that at all, are you? What am I then? Raina studied his face in the moonlight, the strong jaw, the kind eyes, the way he looked at her like she was the most fascinating thing in the world. You're a man who calls his mother for dating advice, she said softly. Who remembers his grandmother's crossword puzzles and takes a woman to a place that matters to him instead of a place that's supposed to impress her. You're thoughtful and vulnerable and, Dylan prompted when she trailed off, and completely dangerous to my peace of mind. The admission hung between them like a confession. Dylan reached over, tucking a curl behind her ear with infinite gentleness. Is that a bad thing? He asked. Ask me tomorrow, Raina whispered, leaning into his touch. Dylan's hand lingered against her cheek, his thumb tracing a soft line along her jawbone. Raina, yes? I'm going to kiss you now, unless you have objections. I have several objections, Raina said, her eyes never leaving his, but I'm going to ignore them all. Dylan's smile was soft and devastating as he leaned closer, giving her every opportunity to change her mind. When she didn't, when she actually moved closer herself, he closed the distance between them. The kiss was gentle at first, exploratory, a question asked and answered without words. But when Raina's hand slid up to cup the back of his neck, when she made a soft sound of pleasure against his lips, Dylan deepened the contact with careful intensity. They kissed under the stars like teenagers discovering love for the first time, with wonder and want and the sweet ache of perfect timing. When they finally broke apart, both breathing unsteadily, Dylan rested his forehead against hers. "Was that proper enough?" he asked, his voice husky. "It'll do," Rayna said, though her smile suggested it had been considerably more than adequate. "For now." "Good," Dylan said, pressing one more soft kiss to her lips. "Because I plan to spend considerable time perfecting my technique. I look forward to your dedication to improvement, Mr. Crawford." And as they walked back to his car, hands intertwined under the Chicago stars, both Dylan and Rayna knew they'd crossed a line there was no uncrossing, and neither of them wanted to go back. Monday morning brought both promise and peril. Dylan Crawford arrived at his office 30 minutes earlier than usual, not because he had pressing business, but because he needed time to prepare himself for seeing Rayna again. Their Friday night had ended with a lingering kiss in her doorway and the promise of dinner again soon, but the weekend had stretched endlessly, filled with replayed memories and anticipation. Now, sitting behind his mahogany desk, with a perfect view of the Chicago skyline, Dylan found himself checking his watch every few minutes. 8:47 a.m. Rayna would arrive soon with her usual Monday morning coffee and that confident stride that had captivated him for months. Except now he knew what it felt like to hold her in his arms. Now he knew the soft sound she made when she was thoroughly kissed. "Focus, Crawford. You're still her boss." The intercom buzzed. "Mr. Crawford, your 9 a.m. briefing is ready." "Thank you, Margaret. Send them in." Dylan straightened his navy tie and positioned himself at the head of the conference table, the picture of professional authority. But when the door opened and his senior team filed in, his carefully constructed composure wavered. Rayna entered last, wearing a fitted black dress that was completely appropriate and absolutely stunning. Her hair was pulled back in a sleek chignon, and when her eyes met his across the room, Dylan saw his own awareness reflected there, along with a challenge that made his pulse quicken. "Good morning, everyone," Dylan began, his voice steady despite the way his heart had started racing. "Let's begin with the Morrison acquisition updates." As James launched into quarterly projections, Dylan found himself stealing glances at Rayna. She sat with perfect posture, taking notes in her precise handwriting, but he noticed small things that wouldn't have registered before Friday night. The way she tapped her pen thoughtfully against her lips, how she tilted her head when analyzing complex data, the subtle smile that crossed her face when she caught him looking. "What about risk mitigation on the European sectors?" Dylan asked when James finished. "I've completed the comprehensive analysis," Rayna said, standing with fluid grace. "The numbers are actually better than we initially projected." She moved to the digital display, and Dylan was transfixed by the confident way she commanded the room. But now, instead of just admiring her professional competence, he was remembering the feel of her hand in his, the way she'd laughed at his stories about his grandmother. "Based on these projections," Rayna continued, "I recommend moving forward with the acquisition, but with enhanced monitoring protocols for the Frankfurt subsidiary." "Excellent work," Patricia said when Rayna finished. "Your insights continue to impress." "Thank you." Rayna's smile was gracious, but when she looked at Dylan there was a flicker of something private in her eyes. "I believe in thorough preparation." "As do I," Dylan thought, remembering how carefully he'd planned their evening at the jazz club. "Outstanding analysis, as always," Dylan said aloud, his tone professionally neutral. "We'll implement your recommendations." As the meeting concluded and people filed out, Dylan found himself alone with Rayna for the first time since Friday night. She was gathering her papers with deliberate slowness, clearly waiting for the others to leave completely. "Good weekend?" she asked casually, though her eyes sparkled with mischief. "Quiet," Dylan replied, closing the conference room door. "Spent a lot of time thinking about jazz music." "Really? Any particular songs?" "The Way You Look Tonight has been stuck in my head for 3 days." Rayna's smile was radiant. "That's a lovely song, very romantic." They were standing 3 feet apart, close enough that Dylan could catch that familiar hint of jasmine in her perfume, but far enough to maintain professional appearances if anyone walked in. "Rayna," Dylan said quietly, "we should probably discuss our parameters," she interrupted smoothly. "I thought we covered that Friday night. Professional during business hours, personal after 5 p.m. "Right. Professional." Dylan nodded, though every instinct was urging him to close the distance between them. "Completely professional." "Absolutely." Rayna stepped closer, ostensibly to straighten some papers on the conference table, but the movement brought her within arm's reach. "Though I should mention your tie is slightly crooked." Without waiting for permission, she reached up and adjusted his navy silk tie with careful fingers. The touch was innocent, practical, but Dylan felt it like electricity. "There," Rayna said softly. her hands lingering just a moment longer than necessary against his chest. Much better. Dylan looked down at her, noting the way her lips were slightly parted, how her breathing had quickened almost imperceptibly. Raina? Yes. The moment stretched between them, loaded with possibility and restraint. Dylan was acutely aware of the glass walls surrounding the conference room, of the dozen employees working just outside, of every reason why he shouldn't lean down and kiss her the way he desperately wanted to. Instead, he stepped back carefully. Thank you for the Morrison analysis. Your recommendations are exactly what we needed. Of course. Raina's smile was understanding, tinged with the same frustration Dylan was feeling. Anything else you need from me this morning, Mr. Crawford? The formal address was deliberate, a reminder of the boundaries they'd agreed to maintain, but the way she said it, with that hint of challenge in her voice, made Dylan want to forget every rule they'd established. Actually, yes, Dylan said, moving to his desk and retrieving a small wrapped package. I have something for you. Raina raised an eyebrow, accepting the gift with curious fingers. Dylan, we said no office gestures. It's not a romantic gesture, Dylan interrupted. It's a professional courtesy. Open it. Inside the elegant wrapping was a vintage recording of Coltrane's A Love Supreme, the same album Raina had mentioned her father teaching her to appreciate. Dylan, Raina breathed, her professional mask slipping completely. This is a first edition pressing from 1965, Dylan said quietly. I thought you might appreciate the connection to your father. Raina looked up at him with eyes bright with unshed tears. This is incredibly thoughtful. But Dylan, this must have cost... It's not about cost, it's about meaning. Dylan moved closer, his voice dropping to something barely above a whisper. You shared something important with me Friday night. I wanted to honor that. For a moment, they stood in perfect stillness, surrounded by glass walls and corporate formality, but existing in their own private world of understanding. Thank you, Raina said finally, her voice thick with emotion. This means more than you know. You're welcome. Dylan hesitated, then added, maybe you could play it for me sometime when we're not being professional. I'd like that very much. A knock on the conference room door broke the spell. Margaret appeared with an apologetic expression. Mr. Crawford, your 10 a.m. appointment is here early. Of course. Dylan straightened his shoulders, shifting back into CEO mode. Send them to my office. I'll be right there. As Margaret departed, Raina gathered her things quickly, clutching the Coltrane album against her chest. Raina, Dylan called as she reached the door. She turned back, eyebrows raised expectantly. Dinner tomorrow night, if you're available? I might be, she said, her smile mysterious. Ask me properly at 5:01 p.m. Then she was gone, leaving Dylan standing in the conference room with the lingering scent of jasmine and the absolute certainty that maintaining professional boundaries was going to be the greatest challenge of his career. 3 floors down, Raina sat at her desk, staring at the Coltrane album with wonder and something dangerously close to falling in love, not just with the gesture, but with the man who'd listened to her story about her father and remembered every detail. Be careful, Mitchell. This is exactly how smart women make foolish choices. But as she traced the album cover with gentle fingers, Raina couldn't bring herself to care about being careful. Dylan Crawford was proving to be worth every risk she'd ever considered taking. Her phone buzzed with a text from Maya. How was the big date Friday? Still maintaining that whole just professional story. Raina typed back, maintaining nothing. I'm in serious trouble. Maya's response was immediate. Good trouble or bad trouble? Raina looked up toward the executive floors, imagining Dylan in his office, probably trying to concentrate on business while thinking about jazz music and stolen moments in conference rooms. The very best kind of trouble. Meanwhile, in his corner office, Dylan was discovering that conducting business meetings while replaying the feel of Raina's hands adjusting his tie was nearly impossible. His 10 a.m. appointment, a potential investor from New York, was discussing portfolio diversification, but Dylan's mind kept drifting to the way Raina had looked when she'd opened his gift, the emotion in her voice when she'd thanked him. Mr. Crawford, the investor's voice cut through his distraction. Your thoughts on the Asian markets? Dylan refocused with effort, drawing on years of professional discipline to engage with the conversation. But as the meeting progressed, one thought kept circling through his mind. 5:01 p.m. couldn't come fast enough. At exactly 4:58 p.m., Dylan's desk phone rang. Dylan Crawford. Mr. Crawford? Raina's voice was formally professional, but he could hear the smile underneath. Do you have a moment to discuss the Henderson portfolio? Of course. Should I come down or would you prefer to come up? I think this conversation requires your office. More privacy for sensitive financial matters. Dylan's pulse quickened. I'll be waiting. 3 minutes later, Rayner knocked on his door. Dylan had spent the intervening time straightening papers that didn't need straightening and checking his reflection in his computer screen like a teenager. Come in. Rayner entered, closing the door behind her with deliberate precision. She was still wearing the black dress from the morning meeting, but something had changed in her posture, her expression. The professional mask was slipping away, replaced by the warm, confident woman he'd danced with under the stars. It's after 5 p.m., she announced, moving closer to his desk. So it is. Dylan stood, his eyes never leaving hers. Does that change our discussion parameters? Considerably. Rayner smiled, settling into the chair across from his desk. So, Mr. Crawford, didn't you have a question for me? Dylan moved around his desk, leaning against it so they were closer but still maintaining some distance. Rayner Mitchell, would you do me the honor of having dinner with me tomorrow night? I promise good food, better conversation, and the chance to discover whether my courtship skills have improved since Friday. Rayner tilted her head, pretending to consider seriously. What did you have in mind? My place. I'll cook for you, something simple but hopefully impressive. We can listen to your new Coltrane album and see what happens when we don't have to worry about public appearances. You cook? I'm learning. Seemed like a skill worth developing for someone worth impressing. Rayner stood, moving close enough that Dylan could catch that hint of jasmine that had been driving him to distraction all day. In that case, she said, rising up on her toes to press a soft kiss to his cheek, I accept your invitation, but I have one condition. Anything. Let me bring dessert. I make an excellent chocolate soufflé. Perfect, Dylan said, his hand coming up to rest lightly on her waist. Though I should warn you, I might be too distracted by the company to properly appreciate the cooking. I'm counting on it, Rayner whispered against his ear, sending electricity straight through his chest. Then she stepped back, her professional mask sliding back into place with practiced ease. Thank you for the business discussion, Mr. Crawford. I'll have those Henderson reports on your desk first thing Wednesday morning. Looking forward to reviewing your analysis, Miss Mitchell. As Rayner headed for the door, Dylan called after her one more time. Rayner? Yes? Thank you. For the album reaction, for being patient with my learning curve, for giving this a chance. Her smile was radiant and private and full of promise. Thank you for being worth the chance. And as Dylan watched her leave, he realized that somewhere between jazz music and conference room conversations, he'd stopped thinking about Rayner Mitchell as a beautiful distraction and started thinking about her as the woman he was falling in love with. Some evenings were destined to change everything. Dylan Crawford had cooked exactly 3 meals in his penthouse kitchen during the 5 years he'd owned the place. Tonight, he was attempting his 4th, and the stakes had never been higher. The salmon was perfectly seasoned, the risotto was creamy without being heavy, and the wine was breathing in a crystal decanter that had belonged to his grandmother. Soft jazz played from hidden speakers, candles flickered on the dining table, and Chicago's skyline glittered beyond the floor-to-ceiling windows like scattered diamonds. Everything was perfect, everything except Dylan's nerves. At 6:57 p.m., he checked his reflection one more time in the hallway mirror. He'd changed clothes twice before settling on dark jeans and a navy cashmere sweater, casual enough to suggest comfort, sophisticated enough to show effort. The doorbell rang at exactly 7 o'clock. Dylan opened the door to find Rayner standing in his hallway, and his breath caught in his throat. She wore a flowing emerald dress that complemented her warm skin tone perfectly, her natural curls styled loose around her shoulders. In her hands was an elegant dessert carrier and a bottle of champagne. Hi, she said, her smile warm and slightly nervous. I brought dessert and celebratory champagne, though I'm not entirely sure what we're celebrating. The fact that we survived a day of pretending to be professional, Dylan replied, stepping aside to let her enter. And you look absolutely stunning. Thank you. Rayner paused in his entryway, taking in the sophisticated decor, the art on the walls, the glimpse of city lights beyond. Dylan, this place is incredible. It's home. Dylan took the dessert carrier from her hands, his fingers brushing hers in the transfer. Though it's never felt more like home than it does right now. Their eyes met, and the electricity that had been building all day in stolen glances and professional restraint finally had space to breathe. So, Rayner said, moving into the living room, you promised to cook for me. Please tell me you didn't order takeout and transfer it to expensive plates. I'm wounded by your lack of faith, Dylan replied, following her with the champagne, though I should probably admit that I called my mother for recipe advice twice. Twice? Raina's laugh was delighted. What did she say? That any woman worth impressing would appreciate the effort more than the perfection. Dylan set the champagne on his granite countertop. Also, that I should probably have a backup plan. Smart woman, do you have a backup plan? Dylan moved closer, close enough to catch that familiar hint of jasmine that had been driving him to distraction. You. If dinner is a disaster, I'm hoping your company will be distraction enough to make it forgivable. Very smooth, Mr. Crawford. Raina reached up to adjust his collar, an echo of their conference room moment that morning, but now without glass walls and corporate consequences. Though you should know I have very high standards for both food and company. So I'm learning. Dylan's hand came up to cover hers where it rested against his chest. Any particular preferences I should be aware of? Honesty, Raina said quietly, her eyes searching his face. I prefer men who are brave enough to be real with me. Real is all I know how to be with you, Dylan replied, bringing her hand to his lips and pressing a soft kiss to her palm. It's terrifying and liberating at the same time. Raina's breath caught at the gentle gesture. Dylan, dinner first, Dylan said, though his voice was rough with restraint. I promised to feed you properly. Right, dinner. But neither of them moved apart immediately, caught in the magnetic pull that had been building for months. The timer in the kitchen chose that moment to chime, breaking the spell. Saved by the bell, Dylan murmured, stepping back reluctantly. Shall we? Dinner was surprisingly exceptional. Dylan had clearly put considerable effort into both the meal and the presentation, and Raina found herself touched by the care he'd taken with every detail, from the perfectly cooked salmon to the wine selection that complemented her tastes perfectly. This is incredible, she said, taking another bite of the risotto. I'm genuinely impressed. Don't sound so surprised, Dylan replied, refilling her wine glass. I'm a man of many hidden talents. Such as? Well, I can make a decent risotto. I know every word to My Girl by The Temptations, and I once fixed my own garbage disposal using YouTube tutorials. Raina nearly choked on her wine. You sing Motown classics? Only when I'm certain no one can hear me. My shower acoustics are excellent. I'll have to take your word for it. Raina's smile was mischievous, though I might require a demonstration at some point. That can probably be arranged. Dylan leaned back in his chair, studying her face in the candlelight. What about you? What hidden talents am I going to discover? I can play piano, not professionally, but well enough to entertain myself. I make bread from scratch when I'm stressed, and I have an embarrassing knowledge of 90s R&B lyrics. Embarrassing how? I know every word to every TLC song ever recorded, including the rap parts. Dylan's laugh was genuine and warm. Now that I definitely need to hear. Not happening, Raina said firmly, though her eyes sparkled with humor. A woman has to maintain some mystery. Mystery is overrated, Dylan said, reaching across the table to take her hand. I prefer revelation. The touch sent electricity up Raina's arm, and she felt her cheeks warm under his intense gaze. Is that so? Absolutely. I want to know everything about you, Raina Mitchell. What makes you laugh? What makes you angry? What you dream about when you think no one is watching? That's a dangerous request. Why? Raina was quiet for a moment, studying their joined hands. Because the more you know about me, the more real this becomes, and the more real this becomes, the more I have to lose. Dylan's thumb traced gentle circles against her palm. What if what we have to gain is worth the risk? Is it? Raina looked up at him, her vulnerability showing through her confident facade. What are we doing here, Dylan, really? The question hung between them, honest and necessary. Dylan squeezed her hand gently. I don't know, he admitted. I know I've never felt anything like this before. I know I think about you constantly. I know that everything in my carefully ordered life has felt different since that night we spent together. Different how? Brighter, more meaningful, like I was sleepwalking through my own life until you woke me up. Raina's breath caught. That's a lot of pressure to put on one person. It's not pressure, Dylan said quietly. It's gratitude. You showed me that there was something missing from my life that I didn't even know I needed. What was missing? Dylan lifted her hand to his lips, pressing another soft kiss to her knuckles. You. The simple word carried the weight of confession, and Raina felt something shift in her chest, a door opening to possibilities she'd been afraid to consider. Dylan, she whispered. Yes, I'm scared. So am I. Dylan's smile was soft and understanding, but I'd rather be scared with you than safe without you. They sat in the candlelit dining room, surrounded by the soft sounds of jazz and the glittering city beyond the windows, both recognizing that they were standing at the edge of something that could change everything. "Should we—" Raina gestured toward the dessert carrier she'd brought. "I mean, I did promise chocolate soufflé." "In a minute," Dylan said, standing and extending his hand. "First, dance with me." "Here in your dining room?" "Here, in my dining room, with no one watching except the city lights." Raina placed her hand in his, allowing him to pull her into his arms in the space between the dining table and the windows. They swayed together, to the gentle rhythm of the jazz playing softly through the speakers, neither speaking, both lost in the intimacy of the moment. "Raina," Dylan murmured against her hair. Thank you." "For what?" "For being brave enough to give this a chance, for trusting me with your vulnerability, for making me remember what it feels like to want something more than success." Raina pulled back to look at him, her eyes bright with emotion. "What do you want, Dylan?" "You," he said simply. "However you'll have me, for as long as you'll have me. I want to learn everything about you. I want to make you laugh every day. I want to be the man who gets to hold you like this whenever the world gets too heavy. That's a beautiful dream. It doesn't have to be just a dream." They stopped swaying, standing motionless in the golden glow of candlelight and city lights, both recognizing the weight of the moment. "Dylan?" Raina said quietly. "Yes? Kiss me, please." Dylan's hand came up to cup her face, his thumb tracing the line of her cheekbone. "Are you sure?" "I've never been more sure of anything." Dylan leaned down, capturing her lips in a kiss that was gentle and urgent at the same time. Raina melted against him, her arms winding around his neck as months of careful restraint gave way to honest desire. When they finally broke apart, both breathing unsteadily, Dylan rested his forehead against hers. "Raina," he whispered. "I know," she replied, understanding without explanation. "I feel it too." They stood together in the flickering candlelight, both knowing that everything had changed and nothing would ever be the same. "So," Dylan said finally, his voice husky with emotion, "about that chocolate soufflé." Raina's laugh was breathless and beautiful. "It can wait." "Can it?" "It can wait," she confirmed, pulling him down for another kiss. "Some things are more important than dessert." "Such as?" "Such as discovering whether you really do know every word to My Girl." Dylan's smile was radiant as he spun her gently in his arms. "I suppose I could be persuaded to perform." "Good," Raina said, her eyes sparkling with mischief and affection, and something deeper that made Dylan's heart race. "Because I have a feeling we're going to have a lot of time to fill." And as they swayed together in the golden light of Dylan's penthouse, surrounded by jazz music and the glittering Chicago skyline, both Raina and Dylan realized they were no longer falling into something. They had already landed, safely and completely, in love. Love was easy. Love at work was an art form. 2 weeks after their confession in Dylan's penthouse, Raina Mitchell had perfected the delicate dance of being in love with her boss while maintaining professional credibility. It helped that Dylan was equally committed to preserving her reputation. Their stolen glances during meetings were subtle, their text messages carefully professional in tone, and their after-hours dates were planned with the precision of covert operations. But some mornings, like this particular Thursday, the effort required to pretend professional distance felt nearly impossible. Raina sat in the Crawford Industries boardroom, reviewing final projections for the Morrison acquisition, while Dylan conducted a conference call with investors in London. She should have been focusing on quarterly forecasts and risk assessments. Instead, she was remembering the way Dylan had traced lazy patterns on her shoulder the night before, while they listened to jazz records on his living room floor. "Focus, Mitchell. There's a reason office romances are complicated." "The European markets are responding better than projected," Dylan was saying into the speakerphone, his voice carrying that authoritative confidence that had first attracted Raina months ago. "We're looking at a 12% increase in portfolio value." Across the table, James from Mergers was furiously taking notes, while Patricia nodded approvingly at the financial reports spread before them. To anyone observing, this was simply another routine business meeting. Only Raina noticed the way Dylan's hand drummed a subtle rhythm against the table, the same pattern he'd tapped against her wrist last night when she'd fallen asleep listening to his heartbeat. "Raina," Dylan said, his tone carefully neutral, "can you walk us through the final risk assessment?" "Of course." Raina stood, moving to the digital display with practiced professionalism, but as she passed Dylan's chair, she caught the hint of his cologne, the same scent that now lingered on her pillow. For the next 15 minutes, she presented her analysis with flawless competence, fielding questions from both the room and the London investors with the sharp intelligence that had earned her this position. But she was acutely aware of Dylan's eyes on her, not with the hungry appreciation of a lover, but with the proud recognition of a man who understood exactly how brilliant she was. That look, Rayna thought as she fielded a complex question about currency fluctuations, is exactly why I'm falling deeper every day. Excellent work, everyone, Dylan concluded when the call ended. Patricia, can you prepare implementation protocols for Monday? James, I'll need the Singapore projections by Friday. As people filed out of the boardroom, Rayna gathered her papers with deliberate efficiency. She and Dylan had learned to avoid being alone together in office spaces. Too much temptation, too many glass walls, too much risk of someone noticing the way they looked at each other. But today, Dylan lingered, pretending to review documents while the others departed. Ms. Mitchell, he said when they were finally alone, his voice carrying a hint of mischief, do you have a moment to discuss the Henderson portfolio? Certainly, Mr. Crawford. Rayna moved closer to his chair, ostensibly to review the papers on the table. Though I believe our analysis is quite comprehensive. I'm sure it is. You're very thorough in your work. The innocuous words carried layers of meaning that made Rayna's pulse quicken. I believe in attention to detail. As do I. Dylan looked up at her, his grey eyes warm with private affection. Sometimes, the smallest details make the biggest difference. They were speaking in code, having learned that even their most innocent conversations carried undertones that could be misinterpreted by colleagues. But the real communication happened in glances, in the way Dylan's hand moved slightly toward hers before stopping, in the way Rayna's breathing changed when he was close. I should get back to my desk, Rayna said quietly. People will notice if I'm away too long. Of course. Dylan's smile was understanding but tinged with frustration. Though I should mention, there's a client dinner Friday night. Morrison's executives will be in town to finalize the acquisition. I'll need my senior team present. Rayna's heart sank slightly. Friday nights had become sacred, their time, away from corporate complications and professional boundaries. Of course, she replied, matching his professional tone. What time and location? The Union Club, 7 p.m., formal business attire. Dylan paused, then added carefully, I'll need you to prepare talking points for the risk mitigation discussion. I'll have everything ready. Rayna moved toward the door, then stopped. Mr. Crawford? Yes? Will this be a late evening? The question was innocuous enough, but Dylan heard what she was really asking. Will we have any time together at all? Hard to say, Dylan replied. These international clients can be unpredictable. Translation, I don't know, but I'll try. Understood. Rayna's smile was professional and slightly sad. I'll plan accordingly. After she left, Dylan sat alone in the boardroom, staring at the Chicago skyline and wondering how other couples managed relationships that didn't require this level of strategic planning. Friday evening arrived with unseasonable rain that turned Chicago's streets into rivers of reflected neon. The Union Club's dining room buzzed with the quiet energy of high-stakes business discussions, leather chairs and dark wood paneling, creating an atmosphere of old-money sophistication. Rayna arrived wearing a midnight blue dress that was both professional and stunning, her hair pulled back in an elegant chignon that emphasized the graceful line of her neck. She'd chosen her outfit carefully, appropriate for the client dinner, but beautiful enough to remind Dylan of what he'd be missing if the evening ran late. Dylan was already seated at the head of the table when she entered, wearing a charcoal suit that made his eyes appear almost silver in the candlelight. He stood as she approached, along with the other men at the table, a gesture of respect that was perfectly appropriate and completely maddening. Ms. Mitchell, Dylan said formally, please allow me to introduce our guests from Morrison Industries. For the next 2 hours, Rayna played her part perfectly, the brilliant analyst, the confident professional, the woman who understood international finance better than men twice her age. She fielded questions about European markets, explained risk mitigation strategies, and charmed Morrison's executives with her combination of intelligence and grace. But throughout the evening, she was acutely aware of Dylan's presence at the far end of the table. The way he listened when she spoke, the proud smile that crossed his face when the Morrison executives praised her insights, the subtle frustration in his posture when convention required him to remain distant. Ms. Mitchell's analysis was instrumental in our decision to move forward, the lead Morrison executive was saying as dessert arrived. Your firm is fortunate to have such exceptional talent. We're very aware of Ms. Mitchell's value, Dylan replied, his eyes finding hers across the table. She's been an invaluable addition to our team. The words were professionally appropriate, but Raina heard the deeper meaning underneath. You're invaluable to me in every way that matters. As the evening wound down and handshakes were exchanged, Raina gathered her materials, while Dylan escorted the Morrison executives to the lobby. She was preparing to leave when Patricia approached. "Brilliant presentation tonight," Patricia said, settling into the chair beside her. "Though I have to ask, is everything okay between you and Dylan?" Raina's pulse spiked. "Of course. Why would you ask? You two seem, I don't know, careful around each other lately, like you're both trying very hard not to step on each other's toes." "If you only knew," Raina thought. "We work well together," she said carefully. "Perhaps we've just found our professional rhythm." Patricia studied her with knowing eyes. "Right, professional rhythm." She stood, gathering her purse. "Just remember, Raina, sometimes the best professional relationships are built on personal trust. Don't be afraid to let people see that you're human." After Patricia left, Raina sat alone in the elegant dining room, wondering if their careful performance was actually making them more obvious, not less. "Penny, for your thoughts?" Dylan's voice made her look up. He'd returned from escorting the clients, and they were now alone among the scattered remnants of the business dinner. "Just thinking about professional rhythms," Raina said with a tired smile. Dylan moved closer, close enough that she could catch his familiar cologne. "Patricia's observation? You heard that? I hear everything when it comes to you." Dylan's voice was low, intimate, despite their public setting. "Are we being too careful? I don't know." Raina looked around the empty dining room, noting that the wait staff had discreetly withdrawn. "Maybe, but the alternative is risking everything we've both worked for." Dylan sat in the chair beside her, close enough that their knees almost touched under the white tablecloth. "What if I told you that everything I've worked for doesn't mean anything without you in it?" The confession was quiet, but devastating. Raina's breath caught. "Dylan, I know we agreed to be careful. I know there are rules and expectations and consequences, but sitting across that table from you tonight, watching you brilliant and beautiful and completely out of reach, it was torture." "You think it was easy for me?" Raina asked softly. "Sitting there pretending that you're just my boss when all I wanted was to hold your hand under the table?" They sat in charged silence, surrounded by the remnants of corporate formality, while drowning in honesty. "What do we do?" Dylan asked finally. "I don't know." Raina looked at him, really looked at him, noting the way his carefully styled hair had fallen slightly across his forehead, the tired lines around his eyes, the vulnerable set of his mouth. "But I know I can't keep pretending that this is just professional interest." "Then don't." Dylan reached over, covering her hand with his despite the risk of being seen. "Come home with me tonight. Not because it's convenient or secret or safe. Come home with me because you want to be there." Raina stared at their joined hands, thinking about Patricia's words, about the careful dance they'd been performing, about the exhausting effort of hiding something beautiful. "What if someone sees us leave together? Then we'll deal with it." Dylan's thumb traced gentle circles against her palm. Together. The word carried weight beyond its simple definition. Together meant facing consequences as a team. Together meant trusting that what they had was strong enough to survive scrutiny. Together meant choosing love over fear. "Okay," Raina said finally. "Okay, okay." She squeezed his hand, her smile brave and beautiful. "Let's go home." As they stood to leave, Dylan's hand settled naturally at the small of her back, not hiding, not performing, just touching the woman he loved because he could. And if anyone noticed Dylan Crawford leaving the Union Club with his brilliant analyst, if anyone saw the way they looked at each other in the lobby, if anyone drew conclusions about the careful distance they'd been maintaining, well, some secrets were worth the risk of discovery. Because sometimes love demanded to be seen. Truth had a way of demanding its own space. Monday morning arrived with an unseasonable warmth that felt like a promise of spring. But Dylan Crawford's mood was decidedly more complicated than the weather suggested. He stood in his penthouse bathroom, adjusting his tie for the third time while replaying Friday night's decision to stop hiding. Walking out of the Union Club with Raina's hand in his had felt like the most natural thing in the world. Waking up beside her on Saturday morning, making breakfast together, spending the weekend like a real couple, it had all been perfect. Now, facing the corporate world that demanded careful boundaries and professional distance, Dylan wondered if courage looked different in daylight than it did in candlelit dining rooms. "Too late for second thoughts, Crawford." His phone buzzed with a text from Raina. Ready for whatever today brings. See you in the conference room, Mr. Crawford. The formal address was their signal, professional facade engaged, but with the underlying warmth that now colored everything between them. Dylan smiled despite his nerves. Looking forward to your insights, Ms. Mitchell. Raina arrived at Crawford Industries 20 minutes early, using the quiet time to settle her thoughts and prepare for what might be a very interesting day. She'd chosen a burgundy blazer that made her feel confident and professional, armor for whatever conversations might arise about Friday night's public departure. But as she settled at her desk with her morning coffee, Raina realized that the anxiety she'd expected was notably absent. Instead, she felt lighter. The exhausting effort of hiding something beautiful had been replaced by the simple relief of authenticity. "You're glowing," Patricia observed, appearing beside Raina's cubicle with her own coffee and a knowing smile. "Am I?" Raina looked up from her computer, noting Patricia's amused expression. "Must be the new moisturizer." "Uh-huh." Patricia leaned against the cubicle partition, her smile widening. "Or maybe it's the fact that you left the Union Club Friday night with a certain CEO and looked absolutely radiant doing it." Raina's pulse spiked, but she kept her voice steady. "I'm not sure what you mean, Raina." Patricia's voice was gentle but firm. "I've worked here for 8 years. I know what workplace tension looks like, and I know what it looks like when that tension resolves into something beautiful." "Caught. How obvious were we?" Raina asked quietly. "To someone paying attention. Completely obvious. To someone focused on quarterly projections and Morrison's acquisition details. Invisible." Patricia sat on the edge of Raina's desk. "The question is, what happens now?" Before Raina could answer, James from Mergers appeared with a stack of files and a gossip-hungry expression. "Did you see Dylan this morning?" he asked without preamble. "Man looks like he won the lottery and got promoted to CEO of the universe." "He is CEO of the universe," Patricia pointed out dryly. "At least the Crawford Industries universe. You know what I mean. There's something different about him. Like he's—" James searched for words. "I don't know, Happy." Raina focused intently on her computer screen, grateful that her complexion didn't show blushes easily. "Maybe the Morrison deal is going better than expected," Patricia suggested innocently. "Maybe." James was clearly unconvinced, though I swear I saw him humming in the elevator this morning. Dylan Crawford doesn't hum. He was humming, Raina thought with an internal smile, because we spent yesterday morning making pancakes and dancing in his kitchen to jazz music. "People are allowed to have good days, James," Patricia said, "even billionaire CEOs." As James wandered off to spread speculation elsewhere, Patricia turned back to Raina with raised eyebrows. "Humming in the elevator?" "I wouldn't know," Raina replied, though her smile gave her away completely. "Right." Patricia stood, gathering her things. "Well, for what it's worth, I think you two are perfect for each other. Just be prepared for questions." The 9 a.m. briefing felt different from the moment Dylan walked into the conference room. Not because anything obvious had changed. He was still impeccably dressed, still carried himself with the same confident authority, still commanded attention with effortless presence. But Raina, watching from her seat across the table, noticed subtle differences that probably escaped everyone else. The tension in his shoulders was gone. His smile was genuine, rather than politely professional. When he spoke about quarterly projections, there was an energy in his voice that hadn't been there the week before. "The Morrison acquisition is proceeding ahead of schedule," Dylan announced, pulling up financial charts on the digital display. "Thanks to exceptional analysis from our team, particularly Ms. Mitchell's risk assessment protocols." Their eyes met across the table, and Raina saw warmth there that would have been carefully hidden just days ago. "Outstanding work, Raina," said Thomas from International Markets. "Your insights have been instrumental." "Thank you," Raina replied, accepting the praise with professional grace while internally treasuring the proud smile on Dylan's face. As the meeting progressed through various agenda items, Raina became aware of something interesting. The careful distance she and Dylan had been maintaining was actually more obvious than natural interaction would have been. Without the performed formality, their professional dynamic felt more genuine, not less. "Any questions before we adjourn?" Dylan asked as the meeting neared its end. "Actually," said Rebecca from PR, "I wanted to mention something. There's been some social media chatter about Friday night's client dinner. Apparently, Morrison's executives were quite impressed with our team's presentation." Raina's stomach tightened slightly. Social media chatter could mean anything, including speculation about personal relationships. "What kind of chatter?" Dylan asked, his tone carefully neutral. All positive, mostly about the quality of our analysis and the professionalism of our team. Rebecca consulted her tablet, though there was one interesting comment about the dynamic energy between our senior staff. Apparently, it was impressive to see a team that works so well together. Dynamic energy. Raina caught Patricia's knowing glance across the table. "Well," Dylan said, his voice carrying a hint of humor, "I suppose good teamwork is noticeable when you see it." "Absolutely," Rebecca agreed. "It's actually great PR for our corporate culture. Shows that Crawford Industries fosters real collaboration, not just departmental silos." As the meeting dispersed, Raina found herself walking toward the elevator at the same time as Dylan, not by design but simply because their natural rhythms were synchronized. "Ms. Mitchell," Dylan said as they waited for the elevator, his voice carrying just enough formality for any observers. "Do you have time to discuss the Singapore projections this afternoon?" "Of course, Mr. Crawford." The elevator arrived, and they stepped inside along with 2 other employees. "What time works best for you? 4:30? My office should be private enough for detailed financial discussion." The emphasis on private was subtle but clear. As the elevator stopped at Raina's floor, Dylan added quietly, "I'll have Margaret hold my calls." At 4:30 p.m. exactly, Raina knocked on Dylan's office door, carrying a portfolio that contained actual Singapore projections along with her racing pulse. "Come in." Dylan was standing at his window when she entered, still wearing his suit from the morning meeting, but with his tie loosened and his sleeves rolled up, a casual intimacy that made Raina's heart flutter. "Close the door," he said without turning around. Raina complied, setting her portfolio on his desk and moving toward where he stood silhouetted against the Chicago skyline. "So," Dylan said, finally turning to face her, "how was your first day of not hiding?" "Interesting," Raina replied honestly. "Patricia knows. James suspects something but can't quite figure out what. Rebecca thinks our dynamic energy is good for corporate PR. And how do you feel about that?" Raina moved closer, close enough to catch his familiar cologne, close enough to see the way his eyes had softened with private affection. "Relieved," she said simply. "I didn't realize how exhausting it was to pretend until we stopped pretending." Dylan's smile was warm and genuine. "I've been humming all day. Apparently it's notable enough to generate office speculation. Poor James was very confused by your obvious happiness." "Good. Let him be confused." Dylan reached out, finally allowing himself the luxury of touching her face, the way he'd wanted to all day. "I'm tired of being miserable for the sake of appearances." Raina leaned into his touch, her eyes closing briefly at the simple pleasure of contact. "What if people figure it out completely? What if there are consequences? Then we'll handle them." Dylan's thumb traced the line of her cheekbone. "Together." "You keep saying that word. Together? I like the sound of it." "Dylan." Raina opened her eyes, meeting his steady gaze. "I love you." The words were simple, honest, inevitable. Dylan had heard her say them before, but in the context of his office, surrounded by the trappings of their professional world, they carried new weight. "I love you too," Dylan replied, leaning down to press a soft kiss to her forehead. "More than I thought I was capable of loving anyone." A knock on the office door made them step apart, though not quickly or guiltily, simply with the practiced ease of people who had learned to navigate multiple versions of themselves. "Come in," Dylan called. Margaret appeared with a concerned expression. "Mr. Crawford, I'm sorry to interrupt, but I have Richard Morrison on line 1. He says it's urgent regarding the acquisition timeline." "Of course," Dylan said, moving toward his desk. "Tell him I'll be right with him." As Margaret departed, closing the door behind her, Dylan looked at Raina with rueful affection. "Rain check on Singapore projections?" "Absolutely." Raina gathered her portfolio, then paused at his desk. "Dylan?" "Yes?" She leaned over and straightened his tie, an intimate gesture disguised as practical assistance. "Good luck with Morrison." "Thank you." Dylan caught her hand briefly, pressing a quick kiss to her knuckles. "Dinner tonight? Your place or mine?" "Yours. I want to see your kitchen, meet your neighbors, understand how you live when you're completely yourself." Raina's smile was radiant. 7:30. "I'll cook this time." "Perfect." As Raina headed for the door, Dylan called after her one more time. "Raina?" "Yes." "I meant what I said about handling consequences together. Whatever comes next, we're in it as a team." "I know," Raina replied, her voice soft with certainty. "That's why I'm not scared anymore." And as Dylan picked up the phone to discuss acquisition timelines with Richard Morrison, he realized that the most important business he'd ever conducted had nothing to do with finance and everything to do with finding the courage to love openly. Some moments demanded everything you had to give. The call came at 11:47 p.m. on a Tuesday, shattering the peaceful quiet of Raina's Lincoln Park apartment, where she and Dylan had been reading together on her couch, his head in her lap, while she traced absent patterns through his hair. "Dylan Crawford," he answered, his voice immediately shifting to alert professionalism. Raina watched his expression change from relaxed contentment to sharp focus to something that looked like controlled panic. He sat up abruptly, running his hand through his hair. "When did this happen? How bad is it?" Dylan was already reaching for his laptop, his body language screaming crisis. "I'll be there in 20 minutes. "What's wrong?" Raina asked as he ended the call. "Morrison Industries just pulled out of the acquisition." Dylan's voice was grim as he started gathering his things. "Effective immediately. Richard Morrison is claiming concerns about leadership stability and questioning our internal professional standards." Raina's blood turned cold. "Do you think they know about us?" "I don't know." Dylan paused in his frantic movement, looking at her with eyes full of regret and determination. "But I have to go deal with this before it destroys everything we've built. I'm coming with you." "Raina, no. If this is about us, your being there will only make it worse. And if it's not about us, then you need your best analyst to help figure out what went wrong." Raina was already standing, moving toward her bedroom to change clothes. "Either way, you're not facing this alone." Dylan caught her hand as she passed. "This could ruin everything. Your career, your reputation. Then we'll build something new." Raina's voice was calm and certain. "Together. Isn't that what you promised?" For a moment, Dylan just looked at her, this extraordinary woman who was choosing to stand beside him, even when the ground was crumbling beneath their feet. "Together," he confirmed, his voice rough with emotion. "Let's go save our company." Crawford Industries at midnight was a different creature than during business hours. The gleaming floors reflected emergency lighting, and their footsteps echoed through empty corridors as Dylan and Raina made their way to the executive conference room where Dylan's senior team had assembled for damage control. "Any word from Morrison's legal team?" Dylan asked as they entered the room where Patricia, James, and Thomas were huddled around laptops and mobile phones. "Nothing specific," Patricia replied, looking up with relief at seeing both Dylan and Raina. "Just a formal withdrawal letter citing philosophical differences regarding corporate governance. That's lawyer speak for, we don't like something, but we're not saying what," Thomas added grimly. Dylan moved to the head of the table, immediately shifting into crisis management mode. "What's our exposure if this deal falls through completely?" "Significant," James replied, pulling up financial projections. "We've already invested $47 million in preliminary integration costs. Plus, losing Morrison could make other potential acquisitions reconsider." "There has to be something specific that spooked them," Raina said, settling at the table and opening her laptop. "Companies don't walk away from $60 million acquisitions over vague concerns." "Agreed." Dylan loosened his tie, his mind clearly racing through possibilities. "Patricia, can you reach out to your contact at Morrison's PR firm? See if there's chatter about what triggered this." "Already on it," Patricia said, phone pressed to her ear. For the next 2 hours, they worked with the focused intensity of a surgical team, analyzing every interaction with Morrison's executives, reviewing every document, searching for the catalyst that had destroyed months of careful negotiation. "Wait," Raina said suddenly, her fingers flying across her keyboard. "Look at this." She pulled up social media analytics from the past week, specifically mentions of Crawford Industries and Morrison. "There's been a spike in speculation about our company culture. Someone posted photos from Friday night's client dinner." Dylan's jaw tightened. "What kind of photos?" "Nothing inappropriate," Raina assured him quickly. "Just standard business dinner shots. But look at the comments." She scrolled through a series of posts, most professional but some carrying speculation about the close working relationship between Crawford Industries' CEO and his striking young analyst. "Dynamic duo," Dylan read aloud. "Crawford's secret weapon. The chemistry between the boss and his protégé was obvious. It gets worse," Raina continued, her voice tight. "Someone identified me specifically and started digging into my background. My education, my previous positions, how long I've worked here." Thomas leaned forward, reading over her shoulder. "They're questioning whether your rapid advancement was merit-based." The words hung in the air like poison. Dylan's expression darkened with a fury that Raina had never seen before. "Those bastards are questioning your qualifications?" Dylan's voice was deadly quiet. "Your intelligence?" Your contributions to this company? Dylan, Rayner said gently, recognizing the dangerous edge in his tone. This isn't about defending my honor. This is about saving the acquisition. The hell it isn't about defending your honor. Dylan stood abruptly, pacing to the window that overlooked the empty Chicago streets. You're the most brilliant financial analyst I've ever worked with. You've single-handedly improved our risk assessment protocols and identified profitable opportunities that my entire senior team missed. We know that, Patricia said quietly, but perception can be more powerful than reality in corporate politics. Then we change the perception. Dylan turned back to the table, his expression resolute. We demonstrate exactly how valuable Rayner is to this company. Not as my anything, but as the exceptional professional she's always been. How? James asked. Dylan was quiet for a moment, his mind clearly working through possibilities. Then his expression cleared with sudden clarity. We give them what they want. Complete transparency. What do you mean? Rayner asked, though something in Dylan's tone made her pulse quicken. I mean, we hold a press conference tomorrow morning. We present our complete financial analysis of the Morrison acquisition, with full attribution for every insight, every recommendation, every strategic decision. We show the business world exactly who developed the frameworks that made this deal attractive in the first place. Dylan, that's incredibly risky, Thomas warned. If Morrison's executives see that as aggressive, let them see it as aggressive, Dylan interrupted. Let them see that Crawford Industries stands behind its people based on merit, not politics. Let them see that we don't negotiate with innuendo and speculation. Rayner stared at him, understanding dawning. You want to put my work front and center, make it impossible for anyone to question my qualifications. I want to do more than that. Dylan moved back to the table, his eyes fixed on hers. I want to offer you the promotion you've earned. Senior Vice President of Strategic Analysis, your own department, your own team, your own decision-making authority. The room went silent. Patricia's phone call ended mid-conversation. Dylan, Rayner said carefully, if you promote me now in the middle of this controversy, it'll look like a company that recognizes exceptional talent when it sees it. Dylan's voice was firm, brooking no argument. It'll look like a CEO who understands that the best business decisions aren't always the safest ones. And our relationship? Rayner asked quietly. Dylan was quiet for a long moment, looking around the table at his senior team, people who had worked with him for years, who had seen him build this company from inheritance money and determination. Our relationship, Dylan said finally, is the best decision I've ever made, both personally and professionally. Rayner Mitchell makes me a better CEO, a better strategist, and a better man. If Morrison Industries has a problem with that, then they're not the kind of partner we want anyway. Patricia cleared her throat. Dylan, are you sure about this? Once you make a public statement, I'm sure. Dylan's hand found Rayner's across the table, his fingers intertwining with hers without hesitation. I'm sure about her qualifications, I'm sure about her value to this company, and I'm sure about what we mean to each other. Rayner looked down at their joined hands, then back up at Dylan's face. This could cost us everything, or it could be the foundation of something better than we ever imagined. Dylan squeezed her fingers gently. What do you think? Ready to bet everything on us? Rayner looked around the table at Patricia's encouraging smile, at James's grudging respect, at Thomas's worried but supportive expression. These people had become her colleagues, her friends, her professional family. Dylan had become so much more than that. What exactly are you proposing? She asked. Press conference at 9 a.m. We present the Morrison analysis as a case study in exceptional strategic thinking. We announce your promotion based on 18 months of outstanding performance. We answer questions about our professional standards and corporate governance with complete honesty. Dylan paused. And we let the business world decide if they want to work with a company that operates with that level of integrity. And if Morrison walks away permanently, then we find better partners, ones who care more about results than gossip. Rayner was quiet for a long moment, weighing risks and possibilities. Then she smiled, the radiant expression that had captivated Dylan from their very first meeting. All right, she said, her voice steady with decision. Let's show them what Crawford Industries is really made of. Dylan's answering smile was brilliant with relief and pride. Patricia, can you set up the press conference? James, I need you to prepare financial summaries that highlight Rayner's contributions specifically. Thomas, reach out to Morrison's board directly, not their executives, but their board members. Let them know we're addressing their concerns publicly. As his team scattered to execute the plan, Dylan pulled Raina aside. "Are you sure about this?" he asked quietly. "Once we do this, there's no going back to privacy." "I know." Raina reached up to straighten his tie, the same intimate gesture she'd made dozens of times, but now carrying the weight of public declaration. "But you know what? I'm tired of hiding something beautiful. I'm ready for the world to know that Raina Mitchell is with Dylan Crawford because they're perfect partners in every way that matters. Even if it gets complicated, especially if it gets complicated." Raina's smile was confident and fearless. "I love a good challenge." Dylan laughed, pulling her into his arms right there in the conference room, surrounded by the crisis they were about to face head-on. "I love you," he said against her hair. "Thank you for being brave enough to stand with me. Thank you for being worth standing with." As they held each other in the pre-dawn quiet of the conference room, both Dylan and Raina knew they were about to step into uncharted territory, but they were stepping into it together, and that made all the difference. At 3:47 a.m., as Chicago slept around them, Dylan Crawford and Raina Mitchell finished preparing for the most important presentation of their lives, not because it would save a business deal, but because it would define who they were willing to be for each other. 6 months later, the Chicago Tribune headline read, "Crawford Industries reports record quarterly growth, following strategic restructuring." Below it, in smaller text, "CEO Dylan Crawford and SVP Raina Mitchell's partnership drives innovation in financial sector." Raina Mitchell Crawford set down the newspaper with a satisfied smile, adjusting her position in the comfortable reading chair that now occupied the corner of what had once been Dylan's austere home office. The space had been transformed over the past months. Warm lighting replaced harsh fluorescence, family photos mixed with financial awards, and a vintage jazz record collection sat beside quarterly reports. "Any regrets?" Dylan asked from behind his desk, where he was reviewing the final details for tomorrow's board meeting. His tone was teasing, but Raina heard the genuine question underneath. "About marrying you 3 weeks ago? About taking your name? About turning down that job offer from Goldman Sachs?" Raina pretended to consider seriously. "None whatsoever. Not even about the media circus surrounding our engagement announcement. Especially not about that." Raina stood, moving to perch on the edge of his desk. "Did you see what Forbes wrote about us last month? Power couple redefines corporate romance." Dylan quoted with a grin. "Crawford Industries' success story proves love and business can coexist. I like the Harvard Business Review piece better. Case study in authentic leadership, how transparency transformed company culture." Dylan saved the document he'd been working on and turned his full attention to his wife, a word that still made his chest warm with wonder. "Hey, you know what I like best about all the articles?" "What's that?" "They all mention your MBA from Northwestern, your previous experience at 3 different financial firms, and your innovative risk assessment protocols." Dylan's smile was fierce with pride. "No one questions your qualifications anymore." "They never should have questioned them in the first place," Raina replied, though her voice held no bitterness. "But I understand why some people were confused. It's not often that the best financial analyst in Chicago also happens to be married to the CEO." "Former best financial analyst," Dylan corrected. "Current senior vice president of strategic analysis, whose department just landed the Peterson Industries contract." Raina's smile was radiant. That was a good day. It had been more than a good day. Peterson Industries had specifically requested to work with Crawford Industries because of Raina's reputation for innovative thinking and ethical business practices. The contract was worth $42 million, more than enough to offset the loss of Morrison Industries, which had become a cautionary tale about corporate short-sightedness. "What are you thinking about?" Dylan asked, noting the thoughtful expression on Raina's face. "The press conference, 6 months ago." Raina traced idle patterns on his desk calendar. "Do you remember how terrified I was that morning? I remember how magnificent you were, standing there in that navy blue dress, explaining risk mitigation strategies like you were teaching a graduate seminar. The reporters didn't know what hit them. I remember the moment when that journalist from the Wall Street Journal asked if our relationship compromised my professional judgment." Dylan's expression darkened with the memory. "And I remember your response." Raina smiled, recalling her exact words. "Sir, my professional judgment led me to identify profitable opportunities that increased this company's value by 37% in 18 months. My personal judgment led me to fall in love with a man who recognizes excellence when he sees it. I'm confident in both decisions." The applause lasted for 2 full minutes, Dylan said softly. "I've never been prouder of anything in my life." Not even when we landed the Singapore expansion. Not even close. Dylan stood, moving around his desk to pull Raina into his arms. Though I have to admit, watching you negotiate that contract in 3 languages was incredibly attractive. Everything I do is incredibly attractive to you, Raina pointed out. You're biased, completely biased, hopelessly biased, professionally compromised by your beauty and intelligence. Good thing I'm equally compromised. Raina rose up on her toes to press a soft kiss to his lips. Ready to go home? This is home. I meant our other home, the one with the piano and the kitchen where we actually cook together, and the neighbors who've stopped being surprised by your terrible singing. Dylan laughed, remembering their decision to split time between his penthouse and Raina's brownstone apartment. Mrs. Chen still looks shocked every time I take out the garbage. She's adjusting. Last week she even complimented your rosebush pruning technique. That's because you taught me how to do it properly. Dylan gathered his things, shutting down his computer with the satisfaction of a man whose work-life balance had dramatically improved. What's for dinner? Whatever we decide to cook together. I stopped planning our meals 6 months ago. Why? Because spontaneity suits us. Raina collected her purse and the jacket that hung on the back of her reading chair. Plus, some of our best conversations happen while we're chopping vegetables. As they prepared to leave the office that had witnessed their first professional interactions, their careful courtship, and their decision to face the world honestly, Dylan paused to look around the space. You know what's different now, he said. Everything? No, everything important is exactly the same. We're still the same people who believe in excellent work, ethical business practices, and treating our employees with respect. We just don't have to hide the fact that we're also people who are completely in love. Raina followed his gaze around the office, noting the ways their lives had blended seamlessly, her financial journals mixed with his investment reports, her coffee mug beside his water glass, the small framed photo from their wedding day positioned where both of them could see it. Do you know what I realized last week? Raina asked as they walked toward the elevator. What's that? I spent so much time worrying about whether loving you would change who I was professionally, but it didn't change me at all. It just made me more myself. Dylan considered this as they waited for the elevator. How so? Confidence. I always knew I was good at my job, but having someone who recognizes my value completely, both personally and professionally, made me stop doubting myself. The elevator arrived, and they stepped inside together. I negotiate better now. I take more calculated risks. I trust my instincts. Love as professional development? Love as personal development that happens to improve professional performance. Dylan reached over and pressed the button for the parking garage, then took Raina's hand in his. I know what you mean. I'm a better CEO now than I was a year ago. Because you're happier. Because I have perspective. Work used to be everything. Now it's just the thing I do between the moments that actually matter. Such as making coffee for my wife every morning. Such as listening to her explain why the European markets are shifting. Such as coming home to someone who makes me laugh and challenges my thinking and reminds me that success without love is just expensive loneliness. The elevator opened into the parking garage, where Dylan's Aston Martin and Raina's practical Honda sat side by side, another symbol of how their different backgrounds had merged into something beautiful. Dylan, Raina said as they approached their cars. Yes, thank you. For what? For seeing me, for believing in me, for being brave enough to love me publicly. Raina smiled, remembering the scared woman who had once worried about coffee meetings and professional boundaries. For showing me that the biggest risks can lead to the most beautiful rewards. Thank you for being worth every risk. Dylan cupped her face gently, his thumb tracing the line of her cheekbone. For making me remember that the heart has its own intelligence, and sometimes it's smarter than all our careful planning. They stood in the concrete practicality of the parking garage, surrounded by the mundane realities of corporate life, and kissed like the lovers they'd learned to be openly, without fear, without apology, without anything to hide. Race you home? Raina suggested when they finally broke apart. You're going to lose, Dylan warned. Your car has excellent safety ratings, but my car has a V12 engine. My car also has a driver who knows shortcuts through Lincoln Park. Fair point. Dylan moved toward his car, then paused. Raina, yes? I love you more today than I did yesterday, and I'll love you more tomorrow than I do today. That's a dangerous promise, Dylan Crawford. What if tomorrow I make a terrible financial recommendation that costs us millions? Then I'll love you more for being brave enough to take risks. Dylan's smile was warm with certainty. That's what partners do. As they drove through Chicago's evening traffic, sometimes side by side, sometimes separated by lanes and traffic lights, but always heading toward the same destination. Both Raina and Dylan reflected on the journey that had brought them here. 6 months ago, they had stood in a conference room at 3 a.m., preparing to risk everything for truth. Today, they drove home to the life they'd built on that foundation of honesty, a life that included professional success, personal happiness, and the rare gift of finding someone who made both possible. Some love stories begin with passion, others begin with friendship. The best ones begin with recognition, seeing someone clearly and choosing to build something beautiful together, whatever the cost. Dylan Crawford and Raina Mitchell had always known they were meant for great things. It just took them a while to realize they were meant for great things together. The end. Would you have made the same choice? What would you have done in their place? Your participation means a lot to the channel. Please share your thoughts in the comments. Thank you so much for watching until the end. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, leave a like, and comment your thoughts. Your participation is very important to us. See you next time.